Good afternoon and welcome to Conversations on Showing Up for Kids. My name's Tim Markle. I'm director of the Southern Regional Center for Children and Youth with Special Healthcare Needs. We're out of the Waisman Center on the UW Madison campus. Conversations for Showing Up for Kids is a place where we try to cover topics that are important to families of children with special healthcare needs or disabilities, to give them a little extra boost, a little extra information, some ideas, and then we occasionally will extend that to non-family members as well, because it takes a community to help us support our kiddos. And sometimes we allow people to use PowerPoints. So today is one of those special days because I have a colleague, Kate, who is going to be talking to us today about implementing quality IEPs, quality transition IEPs for students with autism. And there's a lot of information, and so we're going to make sure that you get the information, but it's going to be a little less give and take between me and Kate, and more Kate telling us what she's learned over these years of working with the Center for Secondary Education for Students with Autism Spectrum Disorders and her work at the Waisman Center. So Kate, welcome. If you want to start your introduction, I will get the PowerPoint moving, and then you just say change slides and let me know what I need to do.
Great. So my name's Kate, and I am a special educator by training, but I work as an outreach specialist at the Waisman Center, and I've spent the years at Waisman working on various projects supporting schools and students on the autism spectrum. So today, Tim invited me to come and talk about the transition IEP, and I have a really nice resource that comes out of one of our projects that I wanted to share with families, and sort of as a way to start a conversation about looking at your transition IEP and seeing if it has all the pieces and parts that are recommended by the experts in our country, and having some just back and forth. So feel free to interrupt me at any time if you have questions or comments. But I'm just going to go through a short section on the transition IEP, and then followed up with a few discussion questions if there are no questions that come up in between. So this is about transition.
Is it looking, you could see your screen?
Yeah, it looks perfect. Yeah.
Katie, you can see the presentation.
Yep, looks good.
Okay, good. And I also have the chat open, Katie. So if things come up, ideas come up as you're listening to Kate, feel free to pop them into the chat as well.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm just going to briefly review some of the information that we share with actually professionals, but we'll talk about it from the family perspective. So this is about transition planning, and it comes from the Center on Secondary Education for Students with Autism. So you can go ahead and change to the next slide. And this first part, which is today's 45-minute session, is going to be on information gathering. So just some ideas about ways to get better information about your own child, and how helping the school gather that information as well. So go ahead and switch. This is just a slide that describes the project. So CSESA was a research and development project that was funded by the Department of Ed, and it focused on developing, adapting, and studying a really comprehensive education program for high school students on the autism spectrum. And so we partnered with schools, and there were 20 schools in Wisconsin that participated, 20 high schools that we worked with pretty extensively for 2 full years to try out some interventions and look at programming and offer up some curriculum that might be useful to these teachers who are supporting kids on the spectrum. So this is just letting you know what the project is, and there's a website there that has a wealth of information for you. There's a whole family section in there if you're interested. So go ahead, flip that slide. What we know from our experts that we consulted with in the CSESA project is that what's going to make a transition IEP for students with ASD a little bit different than for other students who receive IEPs is that we're wanting to make sure that they address domains that are likely to affect students who have autism. And primarily those areas that we want to make sure are included in a transition IEP are addressing independence and behavior, transition, and social skills. Okay. So looking at your own IEPs, if these parts are not all in there, I would encourage you to be talking with your schools about what information we have about your child's ability to be independent, what their plan and vision is for transition, and then how they're faring socially in the high school environment. Okay. Next slide. So this is a matrix. This comes from Seattle University. You can see at the bottom. What I like about this visual is typically, I think as family members and IEP team members, when we have a transition IEP, and that should be starting at age 14 for kids in Wisconsin, sometimes it really doesn't look very different from any other IEP that you've gone to from the time your child was in special ed, because we start at that red bar at the bottom with writing goals, right? What this visual shows you is everything that should be happening before that. So this presentation that I'm pulling from kind of walks through all these steps starting at the top. And today we're just going to talk about that top part, which is transition assessment. Okay. So next slide. I'm going to define transition assessment for you. It's the ongoing process of collecting data on an individual's needs, preferences, and interests as they relate to the demands of current and future work, education, living, and personal and social environments. So as you can see, transition assessment is going to look at a whole bunch of different things. And it should look at all of these things. So that's just, that this definition, I believe, comes from Council for Exceptional Children. And it's just here for you as just a reminder of what we should be looking for in that transition part of the IEP process. So go ahead to the next slide. When you're doing a transition assessment, it should include all three of these areas. We should be looking at employment. We should also be looking at whether the student is interested in pursuing education or any further training after high school. And we also want to be looking at whether or not we need to provide instruction in independent living. Okay, so not only should you be looking at all of these areas that we talked about in assessment, the actual plan should for sure include all three of these things. Okay. Next slide. So I just wanted to share with you, this is a tool that comes out of the CSESA project, and it's called the Secondary School Success Checklist. And that's a hyperlink. The SSSC was something we used with school teams. We worked at every school with a certain number of target students on the autism spectrum to kind of not only look at the plan that was already in place, but make some adaptations and revisions to students' plans based on what we know is important to include. And to get a baseline of what the IEP teams thought were things that needed to be worked on, we used this secondary school success checklist, and students themselves filled it out. Parents also filled it out, and then the teachers filled it out. And we took the information from all three of those team members to decide on like a top 3 or a top 5 skills that we thought were really important for that student to learn. And so you can kind of see, this is small, but we could also hyperlink to the actual form, and you can download these and print them. They're free. On the left there, you're going to rate the skills that that student has. And on the right, you're going to say how important you think it is for your child to be working on that skill. So for example, if this were your parent version, the parent would say, okay, on a scale of 0 to 1 to 2, how far along is my child in their skills able to access and follow a daily schedule, right? And so if they're really good at it, or if they really have challenges with that, we still need to make a determination, is this a really important goal that we want to build on? And do we want to include it in their IEP? And so when you put them all together, you can come up with kind of a hierarchy of needs, and that's a nice way to sort of prioritize IEP goals. Because we know an IEP is only for a year, and we can only teach so many things in a year. And so this is a way to kind of decide, okay, what do we want to do this year? And what do we think is really important? And so the secondary school success checklist covers a whole bunch of different domains, and gives you that opportunity to sort of sort through and pick some things that you think are really important.
So quick question, Kate, because I, of course, have this huge screen. So, of course, I can see it really well on my computer. What is on the skill evaluation? I see the 0, 1, 2, and then there's an N/O and an N/A.
Yeah, so
what's the N/O?
No opportunity would be, so if they don't even use the schedule, if it's not important, which I can't imagine it wouldn't be, but some places don't think it is, you would mark it as no opportunity. If it's not applicable, you would mark it as not applicable. Okay. And so you can see this one for independence and behavior, the subdomain is organization. So things like following a schedule, using a tool to keep track of your assignments or your tasks, bringing materials to your assigned location. These are all things that some students might have challenges with. And they're really nice ideas that plug really well into an IEP plan. So. Any other questions about that? Just a free idea. So an assessment tool that one can use. All right, so moving on. Another thing we really emphasize for our students with autism is really looking at self-determination. And when I talk about self-determination, that's kind of like a big bucket, but it includes things like how well can the student advocate for themselves across environments? How good are they at self-management? And self-management can include things like managing their feelings as well as managing their day-to-day getting from class to class and doing assignments. How well are they doing making choices? Are they able to make choices? Do they have opportunities to make choices? When they make those choices, are they making good choices? And then how is their problem solving? So these are all pieces of self-determination, and self-determination can also be a targeted area of the IEP. Okay. Moving forward, here are some self-determination assessment options. And these are all ones that I'm just sort of sharing because they live online and you can access them pretty easily. The top two are free. They're a little bit more structured. These assessments, like the AIR self-determination assessment, is something that's kind of like the SSST, that you can do it with parents and teachers and the student themselves. There's also the ARC self-determination scale, which is another free one that you can get online. And really you can just plug these into whatever search engine you use. Yep, like Google. And then you can find them. The choice maker comes from a curriculum that's available online. And because this presentation was originally formed for actually transition teachers, we were letting transition teachers know, hey, these are some things you could buy for your school and use with your students, or just download free and use. So Choice Maker is something teachers can buy and teach as a class. The Field and Hoffman Self-Determination Battery, I believe, is also curriculum that can be used. And Tim is posting the link to a site that gives you some more information about those self-determination assessments, so that if you were interested in those, or if you wanted to have a conversation with your school about, hey, I think this would be really helpful for my child, can we look at this as a possibility? All right, so self-determination, a really important skill set that is.
Katie, have you been able to offer a assessment to the teacher? Have they done a sort of a self-determination or some sort of assessment?
No,
Yeah.
obviously being where I work, this is like I took taken my lunch break to do this, but with being at the ADRC, I'm exposed to it a little bit more so. So I kind of asked them years ago why he doesn't have a self-determination like goal
Right.
in his IEP. So at least I got that in there. So this is going to be really helpful because his IEP is coming up in January. So I'm going to start arming myself now to share those resources because she's very receptive, but I think she's relatively new on the scope of things.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, and you can have a copy of this presentation to
okay.
bring with you. And these resources are all available on the CSESA website too. So feel free to share these. These are all designed to help teachers, and especially new teachers, get some more tools in their toolbox to address some of these things. So that's great to hear. So moving forward, here are some independent living skills assessments. So if this is an area, so independent living on the transition IEP is one of 3 major areas that we want to make sure we're addressing for our students, for all students. And what's interesting about our students on the autism spectrum is that we know from research, even those students who do not have an intellectual disability, so those students who are attending almost all their day in general education classes and are getting a standard diploma, when they're assessed for independent living skills, they often fall significantly below their peers in some areas of independent living. And so I always encourage families to include some type of assessment so that we get a baseline of where your child is in terms of their ability to perform independent living skills, because these are also things that we can address in the IEP. Definitely things we want to make sure, because we don't want students going to college and then, not knowing how to do their laundry or having trouble getting dressed in the morning or getting up in time for their classes. And so these are all things that we want to make sure that we're really fully aware of as an IEP team, so we can, and Tim wants to throw in their healthcare, right? So yeah, do they understand their own healthcare needs? Are they able to take care of themselves once they move to a new setting? If that was a lot of kids can crash and burn when they go to college, right? So these types of independent living assessments can be really helpful to kind of get yourself a baseline. Most schools will have a Vineland. That's a pretty easy one to ask for. A Brigance, I believe, I've used the Brigance as a teacher more with my students with intellectual disabilities. The transition inventory I'm not as familiar with, but we know that that's a really good assessment that can be used for independent living skills. And then there's several others. So if you have a reevaluation coming up, or if you want to request an evaluation, which a parent can do at any time, this is one I would definitely think would be a really important one to add to the mix.
Now, Kate, do you know, and this is me asking questions that I don't know the answer to, nor do I know if you know the answer to. So it's really horrible way to do any sort of web stuff, but I'm going to ask it anyway. If someone didn't want to request a full evaluation, because the schools sometimes get, we evaluate blah, 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 blah. Is it possible for parents to say, okay, could we just have an independent living assessment done before the next IEP meeting? I mean, can it be done without asking for full evaluation?
Yeah, sure. I mean, if you suspect any unmet need, you can request a meeting, right? And so typically, in my experience, what schools will do with evaluation requests is, as a parent, I would in writing say, hey, I have concerns about my child's ability to do this, and I'm interested in knowing a little bit more about his or her present level. Can we have somebody look at this? I'd like to call a meeting so we can talk about this as a team, because there's always the process is typically that you would have a pre-evaluation meeting to determine, does an evaluation need to happen? And so if you're just looking for a sense of independent living skills assessment, call that meeting with your team and say, hey, I'm worried about this. Does anyone have information? Can we gather more information? And that would be an easy way to sort of initiate a process, whether they want to go through a full formal re-eval or whether there's somebody in that environment who can just, pick up and do a Vineland. Really depends on what school district you're in and, kind of the resources they have at hand and what their process is. So it's a good question. Yeah. But definitely putting things in writing is always really important because that alerts the team that you're making a request. And so that request should be answered. Okay, moving forward. More assessments. So teachers can do assessments too. You can interview families and caregivers, right? Students can be interviewed by their teachers about their independent living. The school can observe your child doing all sorts of activities and make determinations on some of the things they might need to work on or some of the things they would like to learn how to do. So you want to think beyond just residential independence, although residential independence can be important for some families. Sometimes there are other areas of independent living that are more important. Driver's ed is something I taught a lot as a high school teacher. Obviously, I can't teach the kids to drive myself, but we can certainly work on passing the driver's written test. We can talk about driving. There's lots of ways that schools can help with some of these areas of independent living beyond just, taking home ec or cooking, right? So thinking about the whole child, and that's why, again, I emphasize having assessments in place that are standardized, that are going to hit all of those areas that you might not even think about, can be really helpful. And teacher-made assessments are the ones you see most frequently, these interview type assessments, but those alone are never, ever just enough, right? Because you want a really good picture. So next slide talks about career assessments. So there's lots of different career-related questions we have as we're getting ready to graduate from high school. Most school districts have connected to some type of online learning around careers. Career cruising is a really common one. ONET is another really useful website to learn about careers. And then I kind of like this SDS, which you actually have to pay for, but it gets at more what things you're good at. And what things you enjoy doing before putting a label of an actual job on it. So it kind of works backward, and I like it as a nice compliment because for kids who are able to fill it out, it really gives them a sense of what's inside of a job. Because a lot of times, especially for our kids who are on the spectrum, they have an idea in their head of what a job looks like, but if they've never seen that job, they don't necessarily know all the pieces and parts to it. And I think we're all a little bit like that. So getting a really thorough idea of why somebody likes a certain type of job and what appeals to them about it and how much they know about it, it's going to be really important as they develop sort of a sense of what they want to study or try to do as a career or a job. Okay. Okay, moving on. You can do some teacher-made assessments around career too. So trying out different jobs happens in a lot of schools. Some schools have certain tasks or jobs that they kind of give kids the opportunity to try out. If you think about when I was a kid, it was classes like DECA, right? Where you're doing sort of sales or business related activities. But for our kids in special education, sometimes there's actual jobs in the community that a teacher has a connection with that they can try out and sort of rotate through or get placed in for work experience. Co-workers on the job can fill out checklists about students to kind of give the teacher feedback on how they're doing in those jobs. We can interview students who are engaged in some kinds of career sampling or job experiences. They can even fill things out about themselves, right? How well they're doing at their job. And then obviously high schools have a lot of courses or classes that might apply to some jobs. Things like welding or childcare or first aid. But that again varies where you go to school. So moving forward. So I've given you a lot of ideas of assessments. The next thing that you want to make sure is that the results of those assessments are really well documented in your IEP in a way that you understand. So you might find assessment results in what we call the present level of performance, which is that big paragraph that's usually at the very beginning of your IEP that says what your child is doing well, what your child is working on, and how they're doing on the goals that you've set from last year. If you have a 3-year reevaluation, you will get an assessment results section often. That might have a write-up of some of these assessments that your school has done with your child. And there really should also be like a section about things they need to work on or if there are some areas of concern. And just knowing that 3-year reevaluation is a much more extensive process usually. And it should have a pretty comprehensive look at what everybody on the IEP team has done to determine whether your child still is eligible for services under the category that they've been identified. So when you look at students on the autism spectrum, you would hope that there would be assessments in social communication and independent living. We say that over and over again. Make sure that there's assessments in social communication and independent living, because those are the real primary areas that we know our students on the spectrum are going to have challenges in. So
I just want to reinforce that, Kate, because I know just through interacting with other parents that a lot of times when we talk transition age student and they look at a 3-year evaluation and they have the assessment report, what they have is their career cruising. They have their career assessment, what they, what job may go on. And they don't have these independent living skills assessment, the social emotional assessment. And so I think it's important for the educators that are listening to remember, oh, this is, especially with our kiddos with autism, this is going to be an indicator of success. This is going to be how they're going to succeed in life post high school. And as parents, I now have the knowledge of these assessments. And so I can ask my school to implement them and say, okay, for this next evaluation, for the next IEP team meeting, I'd really like to determine where he's at with his independent living skills, where he's at with social emotional, so that while we still have this IEP team, we can work on these skills before he graduates. And so knowledge of these assessments is just really important.
Yeah, and I thought that would be a really good place to start is, what's already in your IEP, what do you know about your own child, and what do you still want to know, and how do we get there? So I kind of drafted some questions because I knew Tim didn't want us to spend the whole time watching a PowerPoint, so we could have this conversation. So thinking about your own child's IEP, I was interested in knowing how well you think that IEP addresses the areas that are likely to affect students with autism. And those areas, just as a reminder, would be independence and behavior, transition, and social skills. And then we could also talk about how well does your child's IEP address the transition areas of employment, education and training, and independent living. And I'm here to answer any other questions or have any other conversation that you think might be useful or interesting for you and led you to come to this talk today.
No, you have discussion questions, Kate. We will now go into breakout rooms and we will have, no.
For all three of us? We each
all
get our
three of
own
us.
room.
And please take good notes. Make sure you assign a note taker. Boy, I could do all that in my sleep, I think. Well, I was reflecting back because we are at another point, and Katie, I think we've talked about my son before as well. I think you know about Hunter. 23-year-old autism spectrum, wasn't formally diagnosed into an adult, but had an IEP up through his senior year. Not, I wish I knew then what I know now, just like all the other parents that I tend to talk with, it seems, because I cannot remember, these things being included as areas of growth. It was always about, his speech, what is his articulation going to be? How is his writing going to get better? Because he was a poor writer. So all these very much academic oriented, which, I should have known better, right? I as a parent, you just feel you should have known better that, but what about those skills that are going to help him succeed as an adult? How is he going to get along with people? How's he going to figure out what he wants to do next? And not just next, so then that next, but then what's he want to do as a career? And what skills does he need to progress along? So I think these various, assessments and getting IEP teams thinking beyond just career is a really valuable point. Like I said, I know with my kids' IEP, I don't remember any of this.
Well, and for some schools, it's just getting them to think beyond graduation, right? Because sometimes the focus becomes just getting them through their credits, which for our students on IEPs is not enough. They need more. And that's the whole point of the transition IEP.
This is like perfectly timed. Last night we had my son, I'm a little early, but I always believe in getting the information early. My son is in 8th grade. So we're going into that high school, mode. And we had his like 8th grade, like planning meeting, like which high school are you going to, what you're going to need. And I said, well, where does spec ed fit into all of this? And she's like, oh, well, I don't really know. So I'm going to have to like talk to his teacher, because we're in a unique situation where my son is 2E. So he's gifted and disabled. So I think there's 6 kids in the entire school that have IEPs. So I feel like I'm the one that's like, pushing the agenda. They do a great job just because, gifted children tend to have some of those social emotional challenges in and of themselves. So they do that into their school-wide curriculum, which is nice.
Very nice.
But when you go to high school, my kid's going to continue to need those things. And those kids probably got the gist of it in some degree. So, I feel like this is never even a thought in their eye. So this has been really helpful, because he does have a lot of those needs. Like he has those academic things are doing okay, but planning, organization. I said, he'd walk in front of a car without, he doesn't pay attention to anything. So this has been very helpful.
Graduating with 4 courses in algebra, high level algebra isn't going to help him cross the street safely.
No. Or put deodorant on.
Right, this too.
That's what I want him to do.
That'll be a job killer if you're not able to get dressed and clean in the morning too. So all of these things, it's a tall order. One of the big things as a parent of someone who's just transitioning to high school that will be really important to think about is how many years do you expect him to need to get done with all this curriculum? Because obviously our students, particularly our students who are twice exceptional, there's a large course load of credits for high level academics that they need. And on the flip side, lots and lots of areas of growth in terms of independent living skills and self-determination. So to fit all that into a regular 4-year plan can sometimes be challenging. And, as a parent of a child with a disability, you know that kids who need to can take longer to finish high school, or they, maybe would want to do some summer coursework. And so really having a sense of like where all those classes are going to fall and how many things you want them to participate in, I think is going to be really an ongoing conversation with your team and your son about what their vision is for, getting it all in.
And then that just makes me think, as a fellow parent and work with other parents, is that as that high school transition can be sometimes really overwhelming, and sometimes our kiddos can have problems, challenges, letting us know how they're doing with their feelings and with their regulations is, I know my son tends to be no, everything's fine, Dad, because he wants me to feel okay, because he cares about how I feel and he doesn't want me to worry about him. And he already knows that I'm worried about him because of his disability. So any chance he has to make me feel like everything's going to be fine, he'll take that opportunity. And so as you think about entering into high school, I just remind parents to, make sure that they're doing their emotional check-ins and the regulation check-ins with their kids as well, to really try to get an idea about where they are at stress-wise and managing their stress, and working on how to talk about when you feel overwhelmed, so that you don't feel like you're a failure because you're overwhelmed. Because dang it all, overwhelmness is a human condition. It happens to all of us. And so how do we talk about when we feel that way and work through those solutions without then saying, oh, I'll never be able to do it, and getting into that negative thinking. So it's just one of those areas that with our kiddos, there's just a lot of pressure in high school. And so knowing that we have to become even more aware of the mental health of our kids.
Yeah. And that's a big piece of like self-determination, right? Is that self-management, that self-monitoring, right? You don't want to get too overwhelmed. You want to know kind of your limits and how to express them to your teacher and advocate for yourself. That, sometimes I see kids kind of taking it more slowly is helpful. So maybe not a full course load of academics all 4 years, but, lightening that up and then adding in some, some non-academic classes, which, for kids who are on that accelerated track, it sometimes doesn't seem as intuitive that you would have those, lower, like, things like, I think, what did you mention, Katie? Tech ed? Is that what you were talking about?
Like for his,
like for some extracurricular or kind of like less academic classes that might be high interest, or or address some of those independent living skills.
Yeah, he's definitely into that kind of stuff. But Tim, he brought up a really good point, because I think, especially with our kids, we just kind of assume that they can do these things because they get good grades and they do this and they do this. And then all of a sudden, because nobody's got this on their radar, he explodes. And I'm like, that should have been. So I really appreciate that, Tim, kind of pointing that out, just to make sure that stays on everyone's radar. And I kind of have that spiel, like in kindergarten, we were chucking chairs and tipping over bookcases, and our intention is to never get back there. So these are the things we need to continue to work on.
Yeah. And how, sometimes with my high schoolers, I used to just take a trip down memory lane with their IEP and look at some of their younger ones and what were the goals that they had. And wow, look at how far you've come. Remember when this used to be a challenge? And knowing that we're still, working on those things, but in a more adult way.
And you said you'll send the PowerPoint, or that'll be available?
Yes, I can, with Kate's permission, she sent it to me
Yeah.
today. I will make it into a PDF and then send that on to you, Katie.
Yeah, and Katie, it's twice the length because we're gonna do part B. And
Right, so-
I put it all in one, so you'll get the whole thing.
No, that's good, because I don't think I can make it to the second one. I think I have like a work hiccup. I'll have to double check.
Who do I need to talk to, Katie?
I know, right? What this
I'll call
work is
anyone.
getting
Just
in
let
the
me know.
way.
Yeah, I know.
So,
Work-life balance.
I could get that out to you this afternoon, Katie.
awesome. Thank you guys. I really appreciate it. It's like my own private session.
We're glad you came because we would be
It's like-
talking to the ether otherwise.
It's a lot more interesting when we have people.
There's actual people. Yeah.
Right, exactly. A lot
Well-
more fun. Well, given that, do you have any other final questions, Katie?
No, this was super helpful. I really appreciate it. I'm glad I came.
And then Kate, you're going to be back next week. What are you going to be talking about?
Yeah, so next week we will talk about if you want to think in your head that transition services flow chart, we're going to cover the rest of it. So talking about writing measurable goals, talking a little bit about services and course of study, like I was alluding to, how many years you want to spend at high school, and then coordinating with people like the ADRC. So
Our partners.
I don't know anything about that.
Well, that sounds really good. So
All right.
if you are listening to this recording, in other words, if you're not Katie, please check out on the YouTube site, the next part 2 of Writing and Quality Transition IEP for Students with Autism. Kate, thank you so much for,
Thank you.
I mean, you have put a lot of time into learning this stuff. We know this hasn't been an overnight experience, so thank you for all that work and for putting it into a way that helps parents and other professionals to make the world a little bit better for our kiddos. We really appreciate it. So thank you for your time. Hope to see you all next week. And Katie, let me know who I need to call.
All right.
No place else you should be.
All right.
Right.
Thanks, you guys. Have a good
Thanks.
one.
Have a
Bye-bye.
great week. Bye-bye.